Okay, let's talk a little bit about the concept that's called a blech. Okay, we just started, there's a lot of details with the blech. So blech, again, blech is actually a Yiddish word, which means a piece of metal that covers something. That's the definition of a blech. Now, there's two purposes of a blech. One is, the Gemara says, halacha is that sometimes, even though you're not cooking, but we're afraid you might do something that will help cook. In other words, we learned you're allowed to flick a switch before Shabbos, and the light's going to be on for the whole Shabbos. It's not an issue. But by cooking, we're afraid, the Chum said like this, we're afraid if a person starts cooking, and the food is not finished before Shabbos, so we're afraid when Friday night comes, you're going to want to have the food for the meal, so you're going to play around with the coals. In the halacha, the Gemara is expressed, shemiyachte begacholim. Maybe you'll move around the coals to make the fire bigger, whatever it is. So therefore the Chum said that unless the food is half cooked before Shabbos, it has to be half cooked before Shabbos, then you're allowed to leave food on the fire because it's already half cooked before Shabbos. We're not afraid you're going to make the fire bigger because by then already, by the time you want to eat the food, it should be ready. So we're not afraid that it's going to make the fire bigger. But if it's a situation where the food is not half cooked, let's say it's a quarter cooked, whatever, so then you're not allowed to leave a pot on the fire unless there is what's called godav ekotum, which is practically speaking in simple language, you have a blech. What's the advantage of having a blech? When you have a blech, which actually covers the fire, so then that will remind you not to make the fire bigger or smaller, just a reminder. So in other words, the whole thing is rabbinic. You might come to make the fire bigger, and therefore by having a blech, the Chum said, that's fine, you're not gonna make the fire bigger because you're gonna remember there's a sign, a notification basically telling you not to make the fire bigger. What happens if you have a crock pot? So now, how do you put a blech on a crock pot? Okay? So again, this is a perfect blech. Here's the mechanism of the blech, which is the fire of the blech, of the crock pot. And then you have the insert. So now you have a pot on top of the fire. The whole thing is the fire. Because the whole element, it gets hot, and that's what cooks. So halachically, what is a blech in this case? So in a practical way, you take a piece of aluminum foil and you put it all around the inside and the bottom of the mechanism, and it protrudes a little bit up outside of the pot, and then when you put the insert in, you have a piece of aluminum foil all the way around. That is your blech. And that will remind you not to make the fire bigger or smaller. So one second. Some people hold that if it's an electrical appliance that has knobs to make higher or lower, so then you should cover the knobs also. Halachically, you don't have to, but people write, it's preferable because after all, that's how you're going to make the fire bigger or smaller. So the blech might not be enough, even though halachically it's enough. So some people say you should, what?
Would it be considered as keli sheni and other keli on top of that?
No. This is all klish. This is klirishin. If you pour from this into something else, it's a klisheni. But this is a klirishin. Now, 1 second. What happens if you have what's called a Shabbos plata? Now, Shabbos plata is electric, basically heating plate. Now you have two different types of platas. You have a plata that you can make it high or low, or you can have a plata, you just plug it in, and you can't make it bigger or smaller. That's the way it's made. You just plug it in, it gets hot, there's no degrees higher and lower. So if you have such a plata, where you cannot make the fire bigger or smaller, so if I put my food on that before Shabbos, then I don't need a blech, because I can't. The whole purpose of a blech before Shabbos is you shouldn't make the fire bigger or smaller. So I can't, because there's no knob to make it bigger or smaller. Then I wouldn't need a blech for that purpose. What happens though, if it has knobs, it has, high, low, medium, whatever, so then you need a blech. So you'd have to put a sheet of aluminum foil over the hot plate, and then if the food is not half cooked, then you can have the pot on the platter itself. Okay? But again, if the food is half cooked before Shabbos, so then you don't need a blech. If the reason of the blech is because you want to keep the food on if it's not half cooked. Okay? So if the food is not half cooked and you have a blech, it's fine. If the food is half cooked and you don't have a blech, it's also fine. If the food is not half cooked and you don't have a blech, so then you have an issue. In fact, halachically, you wouldn't be allowed to eat that food on Shabbos. You'd have to wait after Shabbos to eat the food. What?
There are lifts that there are like sheets that they have buttons that you do 1, 2, 3, and then it's like higher and lower. There's no knob. You just one.
Yeah, but the button is a knob.
So when you cover the button.
You have to cover that thing, yeah. That's one reason. What?
What constitutes half cooked? I mean, you have
Okay, I'll give you a simple example. A cholent normally cooks overnight. Okay, but that's when it's very well done. Technically, if you put up a cholent, let's say noontime, and Shabbos is 8 o'clock, the food is edible. It's definitely more than half cooked. I mean, it's not cholent that's burnt, that's turns brown and everything is heavily cooked, but it's more than half cooked. It's edible.
what if the cholent is, let's say, like the meat is already pre-cooked, like the potatoes and the whatever.
Okay, so the only din is getting late. But the only din is like this. If I put into the cholent right before Shabbos, raw beef, there's a piece of raw beef, it's green, the meat turned green, is raw beef, and I put it into the cholent before Shabbos, then I don't need a blech. Why? Because this takes a long time to cook. The fact that I'm putting in right before Shabbos, I'm showing to myself that I'm not planning to eat it Friday night, because it's definitely not going to be ready Friday night, even if I make the fire bigger. So therefore, the din is, that also saves from not having to put a blech. But that only applies to beef, not chicken doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to potatoes, because that doesn't take that long to cook. Chicken doesn't take as long as beef to cook. So then, that would be a similar concept, that you wouldn't need a blech either. Okay, so that's one major reason of a blech. There's another, what?
Is that different than having an automatic coffee machine making you coffee? Just you put in the beef, it's not cooked, and it's going to be Shabbos in a minute.
Yeah, but I'm putting in before Shabbos. I can put up a coffee before Shabbos. I can't put a coffee maker on a timer to go on Shabbos morning at 6:30 to make me a hot cup of coffee, even though I said it before Shabbos. For cooking on Shabbos, Yom Tov you could. For Shabbos, you're not allowed to use timers to cook. You can use a timer to close an oven. You can use a timer to close a pot, a crock pot, but you can't use it to cook. What?
What if you made the coffee, and then you put it that it turns on at 6 o'clock to heat the coffee up?
No, but it's Bishul because it got cold already. Okay. 1 second.